There is one moment every narcissist fears above all else. More than being exposed, abandoned, or stripped of wealth and status, it's the moment they come face to face with someone they cannot break, cannot manipulate, and cannot pull into their familiar script. That person is the Super Empath, a rare kind of empath who is not only deeply sensitive, but also fiercely aware, and most importantly, able to see through the very things the narcissist is desperate to keep hidden. Unlike the typical victim who gets trapped in emotional whirlwinds, the Super Empath doesn't just feel, they observe, analyze, and recognize repeating patterns. They don't react according to the script, nor do they waste their energy fighting back in vain. Instead, they remain calm and keep firm boundaries. And that calmness is exactly what unsettles the narcissist, because their entire sense of power is fueled by one thing: other people's reactions. Think about it. Every forced smile, every tear they provoke, every staged argument, it all becomes fuel for the narcissist's fragile ego. But when they encounter a Super Empath, that fuel supply suddenly dries up. All the usual weapons, charm, rage, guilt, gaslighting, lose their bite. The game has always depended on your participation, and when the Super Empath refuses to play, the narcissist's stage collapses into a cold, empty void. This isn't just a clash of personalities, it's a collision between illusion and reality. The narcissist brings illusion, fabricated stories, exaggerated images, glittering masks. The Super Empath brings reality, sharp observation, unshakable boundaries, and an unbreakable sense of self-respect. When these two forces meet, the outcome isn't a loud battle, but a silent implosion inside the narcissist's mind. On the surface, they may still laugh, boast, and act victorious, but within, the cracks have already spread, and once they appear, they never disappear. What makes this confrontation brutal isn't aggression, but restraint. The Super Empath doesn't need to scream, argue, or prove anything. They simply hold their silence at the right moment, withdraw their energy from the game, and live in alignment with their own values. For the narcissist, that's the harshest blow of all, realizing that the power they've clung to their whole life never truly existed. In today's video, we'll uncover 8 brutal truths that make narcissists always regret taking on a Super Empath. And by the end, you'll understand why that quiet strength has the power to shatter the illusionary world they've built for so long. 1. The collapse of control. Control is the lifeblood of the narcissist. From very early in life, they learn one survival rule: if they can't control others, they'll be forced to face themselves, and that is unbearable. Inside them lies a void filled with wounds, shame, and the terror of abandonment. To avoid staring into that darkness, they cling to other people like living mirrors, like puppets, crafting the illusion that they are powerful, untouchable, and always in charge. In most relationships, this game plays out seamlessly. They know how to seduce someone into dependence, when to unleash rage to instill fear, how to plant guilt to control behavior, and when to weaponize cold silence as punishment. Like a stage director, they script the play and force everyone else into their roles. For the majority, the repetition of these tactics is enough to trap them in an emotional spiral. But then comes the day the narcissist encounters a Super Empath, and that's when the cracks begin to form. At first, they launch their usual tricks: sweet words, lofty promises, charm mixed with a hint of power. But instead of falling into the maze, the Super Empath simply observes. When accusations and fiery anger are hurled to provoke a reaction, there are no frantic explanations, no desperate tears. When tension is staged to spark a heated argument, what comes back is not chaos, but calm silence. Not the silence of fear, but a deliberate silence, a refusal to step into the game. That moment sends the narcissist into disarray. They are used to pressing emotional buttons and watching the other person cry, plead, or explode, like a machine built to deliver predictable responses. But now the machine is broken. No signals come back, no energy to siphon. The empty space turns into a mirror reflecting the truth. The power they thought they held was never real at all. This collapse doesn't arrive with a dramatic explosion or a public meltdown. It unfolds quietly inside the narcissist's own mind. Outwardly, they may still laugh, boast, and act unchanged, but within, the fracture has formed, and it widens with every passing moment. The belief that they can always control, always dominate, is now threatened by an undeniable reality. There exists someone they cannot bend. And it is this contradiction that begins the inner destruction. On one hand, they must preserve the image of being invincible. On the other, they have lived the undeniable truth that their power has limits. These opposing realities crash together, creating a gnawing void, a corrosive insecurity. To cover it up, they might lash out harder, launch more vicious attacks, or swing the other way, playing weak in hopes of triggering pity. But no matter what role they slip into, it all falls flat. The super empath has already seen the script and refused to play. This is the moment the narcissist regrets. Not because they lost an argument, not because someone wounded them with sharp words, but because the truth was revealed in the cruelest way possible. Their power was never real. It only had force when others agreed to the game. And once the game ends, their stage is stripped bare. No audience, no script, no spotlight. For the super empath, refusing to react isn't just self-defense. It's a declaration of inner freedom. No shouting required, no debate necessary, just calm presence sending a message louder than words. I control myself, and that is enough. That is why, deep down, narcissists always regret crossing paths with a super empath, because such an encounter doesn't just strip away their temporary sense of control, it forces them to face what they fear most, themselves. And once they've seen that truth, they can never fully believe in the mask they've spent a lifetime constructing. 2. The mirror of truth. Narcissists are used to projecting what they cannot bear within themselves onto others. When they feel shame, they make you carry it. When they're haunted by inferiority, they plant self-doubt inside you. When a surge of irrational anger overwhelms them, they funnel it into you and stand back to watch you scream in chaos. Their very survival depends on turning other people into emotional dumping grounds, just so they can temporarily escape the crushing weight of their inner darkness. But everything changes when they meet a super empath. This person does not absorb the poison, nor do they react in the predictable ways. Instead, they hold steady, their mind clear, and through that clarity, they become a mirror. Not the warped mirror the narcissist is used to bending to their liking, but a crystal clear one, reflecting back everything the narcissist tries to project. The moment they face that mirror is almost unbearable. Instead of watching someone else unravel in shame, they see their own fury ricochet back at them. Instead of planting insecurity in another, they are confronted with the raw outline of their own. Everything they've run from, everything they've shoved outward now returns, unaltered, undistorted, and it's a truth they are never prepared to face. The super empath doesn't need sharp accusations, clever words, or even a raised voice. Sometimes it's just a calm gaze, a silence that doesn't waver, or a boundary drawn with quiet certainty. That steadiness becomes the most terrifying mirror of all. The narcissist suddenly sees the cracks in their own mask, the hollowness behind the performance, the emptiness they've tried to bury. To them, being seen is being stripped bare. They've spent their entire lives building an image, strong, brilliant, in control, superior. But in the mirror of the super empath, the makeup slides off and the reality shines through. A wounded person, obsessed with the fear of not being enough, perpetually dependent on others to validate their worth. This reflection throws the narcissist into crisis. They no longer control the narrative about themselves. Instead of convincing others of the hero or victim role they've written, they now stand before someone who sees straight through the script. And the cruelest part, that person doesn't flinch. They don't cry, they don't scream, they don't beg, and they don't run. They simply stand, holding the truth steady in their eyes like an unyielding mirror. Inside the narcissist's mind, this echoes like thunder. Doubts creep in. Not doubts they admit, but ones they fight against with fury. They may smear the super empath, calling them cold, unfeeling, even heartless, but the truth doesn't move. It doesn't bend. No matter how loudly they accuse, the honest reflection continues, trapping them in the one place they cannot escape: themselves. It feels like being locked in a room with no exits, where every lie and every performance is stripped away until only the raw self remains, and that is the deepest pain of all. The more they try to shatter the mirror, the more they realize its strength doesn't come from aggression, but from unwavering steadiness. The super empath is not fighting to win. They are simply refusing to be pulled in, and that stillness, that unshakable presence, becomes the heaviest sentence of all. In rare moments, a narcissist may feel an unfamiliar fear that the other sees too much, that this mirror doesn't just expose them to themselves, but to the world. Fear of being unmasked, losing the carefully crafted role, the false persona. From this fear they retreat, slipping away, seeking easier prey, someone who will play along. But even when they flee, the memory of being seen lingers like a wound that won't heal. The super empath is not seeking victory in this encounter. They don't need to be proven right. They simply live from their awakened awareness and firm inner boundaries. And yet, that alone delivers the most devastating blow, because when faced with the honest mirror, the narcissist doesn't just lose power over the other, they lose the ability to keep believing in their own illusion. That's why for a narcissist, meeting a super empath is never just an encounter. It's a turning point, a moment they are forced to face the truth they hate most, that everything they've built is nothing more than paint over rotting foundations. From that moment on, no matter how hard they try to hide, they can never forget what it felt like to be reflected, to be seen all the way down to the bone. The refusal to play the emotional game. If you had to picture a narcissist, they are like the director of an endless play. In every relationship, they build a stage full of drama where every word, every gesture serves one purpose: to pull others into the roles they've already scripted. At the beginning, it may look like a love story, sweet, full of promises, as though you're the star of a fairy tale. But soon, the velvet curtain is replaced with darkness, and you find yourself pushed into tragedy, cold indifference, vague accusations, endless push and pull games. For the narcissist, these performances aren't about connection. They're about reaction. Every tear, every explanation, every pleading glance becomes fuel to feed their sense of power. The more unsteady you are, the more real they feel. To them, your emotions are props, and your life is just a backdrop that makes their character shine. But when the narcissist encounters a super empath, the script begins to crumble. This time, the main character doesn't step onto the stage. Instead of chasing the carefully laid traps in the dialogue, the super empath stays outside, watching with clear eyes. They notice everything. The shift in tone meant to spark guilt, the lowered gaze meant to feign weakness, the long silences meant to trigger anxiety. They see it all, but most importantly, they don't step into the role. For the narcissist, this refusal is a nightmare. A stage without a co-star isn't theater at all. Each accusation falls into emptiness. Every attempt to provoke an argument is met with a calm nod, or worse, with silence that doesn't budge. And then the most terrifying thing happens. There is no audience. The play collapses. Because the one person they wanted to control has chosen not to play. Picture a conductor used to pressing keys and commanding an orchestra, only to find one day that no matter how hard they press, no sound emerges. The hall is silent. No echo remains to prove their greatness. And for the narcissist, that moment feels like having the very reason for their existence ripped away. The super empath doesn't need to shout or expose every lie. They simply step out of the performance, leaving the stage the narcissists so carefully built. In doing so, they reclaim their energy, refusing to leave even a drop of fuel behind. And it is this withdrawal that strikes the hardest blow. What confuses the narcissist most is the calmness of the decision, not loud resistance, not a noisy battle, but a quiet shake of the head. I'm not playing. To the narcissist, this makes no sense. In their world, everyone must react, whether with love, hate, or rage. To not react at all is to deny the play itself. And that denial makes them feel like they vanished from their own story. The harder they try to provoke, the more desperate they become. They may swing from anger to vulnerability, from threats to begging, from coldness to seduction, all just to lure the super empath back on stage. But when none of it works, helplessness creeps into every breath. They can no longer control the rhythm, steer the narrative, or keep themselves at the center. In that moment, what they once believed, that they are the director of every script, the master of every climax, shatters. They see that their power was never absolute. It only existed through the cooperation of others, and when that cooperation is withdrawn, all that's left is emptiness. For the super empath, this isn't a battle to win or lose. There's no need to prove who's right or wrong. They simply protect their peace, saving their energy for something worthy. And in that choice, they become untouchable. Because once you stop letting others decide your emotions, you become free. And for the narcissist, that freedom is the bitterest defeat, not because they lost an argument, but because they lost their ability to keep writing the play. Without the cooperation of the one they sought to control, they lose their role as director. And when the curtain falls in silence, the narcissist is left facing the truth for the first time. No one is watching anymore. 4. When boundaries become an impenetrable wall. For the narcissist, other people's boundaries are nothing more than faint lines, existing only to be stepped over at will. In their world, others are merely extensions of themselves, suppliers of attention and emotional fuel, expected to be available on demand and discarded when no longer needed. The idea that someone could have an inner territory, a sacred space they cannot enter, is to them like a foreign language they've never bothered to learn. In most relationships, they rarely have to confront this. Many people, out of kindness or habit, bend. They overlook the cruel joke. They tolerate the small invasions to keep the peace. They open their hearts even when something feels wrong. That softness is what sustains the narcissist, convincing them that every door can eventually be forced open, every wall will one day crumble. But with a super empath, the story changes. Their boundaries are not hastily built walls of fear, but the result of a long journey of self-awarenessness. After wounds and betrayals, after bitter lessons, they have learned to honor themselves. They know their inner peace is not a bargaining chip to please others, and from that understanding, their boundaries become part of who they are. Steady, non-negotiable, unshakable. When the narcissist tries to cross them, they encounter not explosive resistance, but a wall, unseen yet solid as stone. They unleash their usual weapons: sweet charm, fake concern, subtle insults hidden in laughter. But what comes back is a calm response, a brief nod, a concise answer, sometimes nothing more than silence. No door opens, no crack appears. That's what drives the narcissist into rage, because to them, rejection isn't just defeat, it's humiliation. It tells them they are not the center, not the one who gets to decide another's feelings or choices. For them, this is a direct strike at their illusion of power. Imagine a conqueror, used to every city opening its gates, whether out of fear or deception. One day they stand before a fortress. Gates shut, guards unwavering. They try cunning, they fake weakness. They attack with force. Yet every effort fails. The walls do not shake, and for the first time they must face the truth. Not every land belongs to them. The super empath knows the cost of surrendering boundaries. They know that opening the gates to a narcissist means trading peace for chaos. So they hold firm, not with hatred, but with self-respect. Their boundaries aren't meant to fight against someone, but to protect what is most sacred, their wholeness and their freedom. For the narcissist, this creates both anger and fear. They feel excluded, pushed out, no longer the center of the universe they believe they command. In desperation, they throw everything at the wall, playing weak to evoke pity, casting themselves as the victim to stir guilt, or lashing out with venom to break resolve. But to a super empath who has seen through the game, none of it works. And that futility is the heaviest blow of all. It doesn't just enrage the narcissist, it shakes the foundation of their belief, because for the first time they must accept their power is not limitless. There are places they cannot invade, there are people they cannot control, and to an ego built entirely on the illusion of omnipotence, that realization is nothing less than a sentence. When they retreat, they will never admit defeat. They'll search for another audience, another victim, more pliable to patch up their image. But no matter how many new stages they build, the memory of the wall they couldn't break remains, like a crack in the mask. And every time they remember, the bitter regret returns. For daring to confront a super empath, someone who not only built walls to protect themselves, but also proved that the narcissist's power was never absolute. In that moment, the truth becomes undeniable. Control only exists where it is allowed. When faced with someone who guards their boundaries, the narcissist's empire of illusion crumbles, not because it was attacked, but because it couldn't penetrate. And that helplessness is the bitterest defeat of all. 5. When the story is no longer theirs to tell. A narcissist doesn't just want to control your emotions, they want to control the entire narrative of the relationship. In their script, they are always the center, sometimes the hero, sometimes the poor victim, other times the wise one who is always right. And you are just the supporting role, the mirror, the excuse that allows them to reinforce the image they've built. Every word, every memory, every event gets rewritten, edited, twisted until it fits the story they want to tell. In most relationships, this tactic works. Human beings naturally second-guess themselves when their memories are challenged. When the narcissist insists, "I never said that," many people wonder, maybe I really did remember wrong. When they declare, "You're the one who hurt me," victims often sink into guilt, even when the truth is the complete opposite. This ability to rewrite history is one of their sharpest weapons. Because if you doubt your own memory, your own perception, then you are forced to rely on theirs. But with a super empath, the trick has no ground to stand on. A super empath has a powerful emotional memory. They don't just recall what was said, they remember how it felt. They see the gap between words and actions. And more importantly, they trust their intuition rather than letting someone else redefine their reality. So when the narcissist tries to twist the story, the super empath doesn't spiral. They remain calm, recognize the distortion, and refuse to participate. This leaves the narcissist stunned. For the first time, the script they painstakingly wrote is rejected. They may scream, argue, throw out half-truths as evidence, but their opponent doesn't argue back, doesn't get pulled in. The super empath simply holds on to the truth they know. They don't need to shout it, because their consistency, their steady actions speak louder than words. For the narcissist, this is a devastating collapse. Once the story is no longer theirs to control, they lose their most important tool of manipulation. If they can't rewrite the past, they can't control the present. If they can't define your role, they can't maintain their own image. The whole stage begins to flip, and the light shines on what they've tried so hard to hide. Imagine an author accustomed to endlessly editing their manuscript at will, suddenly forced to confront the original draft. No more additions, no more cover-ups, just the raw truth staring back at them. For the narcissist, that feeling is like being robbed of the pen and made to read the story they've spent their life trying to erase. In desperation, they may try to drag you into endless debates, hoping that the more you argue, the more chances they have to bend reality. But the super empath denies them that stage. Refusal to engage, standing firm outside the chaos, that's the fatal strike. Because the narcissist's power only exists when others agree to play by their rules. When you hold the truth and refuse the role, they are left with a story no one listens to. And this strike takes away more than control over you. It threatens the very illusion they live on. Because if one person sees through the mask, others might too. And the fear of being unmasked before an audience is the nightmare they carry in secret. The super empath does not seek to destroy. They don't need to expose or accuse. They only need to hold firm to the truth they know, refusing to let it be distorted. And that simple act shakes the narcissist to the core, because once the story is no longer theirs to tell, the mask they've worn for so long begins to crack. And that's what leaves them in deep regret. They once believed they could control not just people's feelings, but their memories, their very reality. But one encounter with a super empath is enough to show them the limits of that game, and the memory of losing control over the narrative will haunt them forever. Like a jagged tear in a novel they can never rewrite. Truth 6. When silence speaks louder than any argument. For the narcissist, every reaction is a reward, a scream, a tear, an hour-long explanation. All of it becomes precious fuel to sustain their illusion of power. They don't care if the emotion is positive or negative. What matters is your participation in the game. To them, even a heated argument is a victory, because it proves they are still important enough to control how you feel. But everything collapses when they face the silence of a super empath. This silence is not the fearful silence of submission, nor the hopeless silence of resignation. It is deliberate, a silence carrying the weight of awareness and self-control. When the narcissist throws a verbal dagger, they expect the sound of pain, but instead of a reaction, they are met with stillness. The dagger falls into the void, no wound, no echo. For them, it is suffocating. In the narcissist's eyes, that silence becomes a giant mirror, reflecting the game they are trying to play. They shout, but the sound bounces back to them. They flatter, then threaten, but nothing changes. With every passing minute, the silence makes them feel like they're performing a monologue in an empty room. And for someone who survives on reactions, that is the harshest punishment of all. The danger of silence is that it forces the narcissist to face the emptiness within. Without your echo, they are left alone with the very void they fear most. They realize that all their power has always been borrowed, fed by the energy of others, and when that flow is cut off, they are left with nothing but a fractured self. In crisis, narcissists often escalate. They hurl heavier accusations, unleash outrageous lies, or switch to feigned weakness to break through the wall of silence. But to a super empath who sees through the game, these efforts are nothing more than wild swings at the air. The silence remains, calm, steady, unshaken. And it is that calmness that drives the narcissist into panic. If you rage, they can boast of their victory. If you cry, they can tell themselves they still matter. But when you are silent, when no trace of them exists in your emotions, they are forced to confront the truth. You've stepped out of their control. Imagine an actor standing on stage, used to applause or boos after every performance. Then one day the curtain falls, and the entire audience sits in absolute silence. No sound, no reaction, nothing but emptiness. That is when they realize the theater has lost its audience. For the narcissist, the silence of a super empath delivers the same shock, a declaration that they no longer have the power to move you. In the hands of someone awakened, silence becomes a weapon sharper than words. It is not meant to destroy or retaliate, but to protect energy and dignity. The super empath does not need to scream to prove they're right, nor cry to be understood. They only need to stay silent, and that silence becomes an unbreakable boundary, forcing the narcissist to face their own weakness. The irony is that narcissists always believe they are stronger because they are louder, because they know how to stir emotions. But the silence of a super empath reveals the opposite truth. The one who needs noise to exist is the weakest, and the one who can stand calmly in stillness, that is where true power lies. As silence stretches on, panic sets in. The narcissist may shift tactics, returning to flattery, promises, or pleas for pity. But none of it works if the super empath remains firm, because once someone has tasted the freedom of silence, they will never willingly return to chaos. And that is why narcissists regret most deeply. They once believed that through arguments and debates they could always twist reality back in their favor. But what they never expected was that their greatest defeat wouldn't come from fierce accusations, but from the quiet weight of silence. And once they've felt that failure, the memory of silence will haunt them forever, a reminder of just how fragile their supposed power truly was. The 7 woes of omnipotence, Shatters. Inside every narcissist lives an unshakable belief that they can conquer anyone. This belief wasn't born overnight. It was built from countless past experiences. They've triumphed before, bending even the strongest to their will. They've watched resilient souls break, seen tears fall from eyes once unyielding, and felt those same people crawl back into their arms. Each small victory stacked like bricks, forming the towering illusion that they are invincible, that no one can ever escape their labyrinth. But that belief begins to crumble the moment they meet a super empath. At first, they think of it as just another challenge. Perhaps this person is harder to break, perhaps it will take more time. But in the end, they believe the result will be the same. Their illusion of omnipotence feeds their arrogance. If I push long enough, no one can resist me. Yet, as time passes, every familiar tactic fails. Sweet words don't soften the super empath. Explosive rage doesn't shake them. Blame doesn't stick. Even pitiful displays of victimhood no longer stir pity. Everything falls into emptiness. And for the first time, the narcissist realizes there is someone they cannot reach. That moment feels like an earthquake. The wall of omnipotence begins to crack. They are forced to see the truth. They are not the invincible force they believe themselves to be. They have limits. There are people beyond their control. And this truth is more terrifying than any defeat. Because if the illusion of omnipotence collapses, they must face their deepest fear, that underneath it all, they are just another flawed, vulnerable human being, no different from anyone else. In the throes of this crisis, the narcissist often chooses denial. They may grow more aggressive, launching extreme attacks, or they may swing the other way, pretending to be so pitiful, so broken that surely a reaction will come. But no matter how they change the script, the super empath stands firm, unmoved, unshaken. And that steadiness becomes the final hammer blow, smashing the illusion they've spent a lifetime constructing. The greatest pain isn't losing to one person. The greatest pain is realizing that the image of themselves, the unbeatable self, was nothing more than a distorted mirror. The narcissist may walk away, may seek out a new, easier victim, but deep down the memory of this defeat lingers forever. It becomes a crack in their mask of pride, and every time they look into the mirror, they see it. No matter how many layers of paint they smear on top, the super empath doesn't need violence or sharp accusations to break them. Simply by standing firm, refusing to be a puppet, they shake the foundations of an empire of illusion, and that is what the narcissist regrets most. They didn't just lose a relationship, they lost their core belief that they could control anyone, anytime. The naked truth is undeniable. Their power was never absolute. It only existed where others allowed it. And the moment they meet someone who refuses to be controlled, the entire castle of illusion collapses in an instant. For the narcissist, this isn't just defeat. It is the death of a belief that sustained them their entire life. 8. The fear of being forgotten. Of all the fears a narcissist carries, there is one more terrifying than any other: the fear of being forgotten. They can endure being hated because hatred still means you think of them. They can handle criticism because criticism still means they have influence. They can even live with contempt because contempt is still a reaction. But when their name fades from your mind, when their image no longer stirs emotion, when their presence disappears from the story of your life, that is the cruelest sentence of all. A narcissist survives through reflection. Their sense of value doesn't come from within, but from the eyes of others. If no one looks, no one reacts, no one remembers, they feel as if they cease to exist. That's why they cling to your memory, desperate to leave a mark, whether through joy or pain, as long as you can't escape their orbit. But the super empath knows how to withdraw in silence. No hatred, no revenge, no doors left ajar. They don't need to prove anyone wrong, nor do they demand justice. They simply walk away, focus on their own life, and slowly the narcissist's presence dissolves into emptiness. No calls, no pleas, no arguments, just silence. A heavy silence, until the narcissist realizes they've been erased from the story. At first, they don't understand. They assume it's temporary, that you'll come back like before. They believe their charm or the drama of the relationship will eventually pull you in again. But as time stretches on, as every message goes unanswered, as every signal is met with cold silence, unease creeps in. They begin to see that this time is different. You're no longer playing the game. Worse, you're no longer thinking of them. For a narcissist, this feels like psychological death. Their existence is tied to being the center of someone else's world. When you leave, taking your gaze, your emotions, your memories with you, they are suddenly erased from the map of power, and their deepest fear rises to the surface. If no one remembers me, who am I? The forgetting a super empath creates is not loud. It isn't revenge. It's simply the withdrawal of all energy once given. No gaze to reflect in, no emotions to feed on, no story to rewrite. The narcissist is forced to face their own emptiness, the very void they've avoided their entire life. What makes this fear so brutal is its permanence. An argument can be mended with a fake apology. Hatred can be turned back into attention, but forgetting cannot be undone. When you learn to live happily without them, when you build a new life with no trace of them, their return feels like the intrusion of a stranger's name. And that is something they cannot endure. Yes, they may seek out new supply, new audiences to prove they still exist, but deep down, they know one person saw through them, refused them, and walked away forever. That memory remains like a scar that never heals, a reminder that they are not the center of everything. No matter how many new admirers gather, they cannot erase the truth. Once, there was a stage where they were abandoned in silence. The super empath doesn't win by defeating. They win by living better, by walking in freedom, by refusing to be chained to the past. And that very freedom becomes the heaviest sentence for the narcissist, because once you can live without them, their power is gone for good. In the end, the fear of being forgotten doesn't just make the narcissist regret facing a super empath, it forces them to confront the most painful truth of all. They were never the main character in your story, and perhaps they were never truly the main character in their own. And that truth is one they will carry no matter how hard they try to bury it until the very end. In the end, when a narcissist dares to go up against a super empath, What they never expect is that they've opened the very door to the truth they fear most. Every illusion of control, every emotional game, every fantasy of omnipotence begins to crumble in the face of the empath's silence, steadiness, and inner strength. A super empath does not win through rage, nor do they need loud acts of revenge. They win through calmness, through holding firm to their boundaries, and through the ability to step out of the chaos and live a free life. And that is what leaves the narcissist with the deepest regret, not just the loss of control, but the realization that their power was never real to begin with. For you, the one listening, remember this: your greatest strength is not in fighting to prove you're right, but in protecting the peace of your own soul. When you stop reacting the way others want you to, when you choose to live in freedom and in the truth of your own worth, every mask, every illusion of control falls away into nothing. That is the quiet victory, the most radiant victory of all,